This is the new Koenigsegg Jesko. This is very, very emotional for me. Koenigsegg. And I think it probably looks more similar to the previous Koenigsegg's than it is. But I do believe it's probably the biggest wing on any production car ever.
What happens when a teenage dream from a small town in Sweden decides to challenge one of the most powerful automotive empires in history? For 3 decades, Christian von Koenigsegg has been chasing a goal that many believed was impossible: building the fastest and most innovative cars on Earth. Along the way, his company has gone head-to-head with Bugatti.
The passion for cars, I guess, or automobiles. As far as I can remember, I've been totally fascinated by cars.
A brand backed by billions in resources, legendary engineering teams, and the power of the Volkswagen Group. Yet somehow, the underdog keeps breaking records and rewriting expectations. So how did Koenigsegg do it? And why does this rivalry represent far more than speed? Let's discuss the record, the technology, and the future of hypercar, the dream that challenged Bugatti. To understand why this record matters the way it does, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of Koenigsegg as a company with resources and recognition. The beginning as a concept, as a statement of intent made by an 18-year-old in Sweden in 1994 who looked at the landscape of automotive performances and decided, with what most people in the industry would have called spectacular naivety, that he was going to build the fastest car in the world. Christian von Koenigsegg did not have a factory. He did not have investors. He did not have a parent conglomerate with $40 billion in annual revenue ready to absorb the losses of a prestige performance division while the accountants at headquarters looked the other way. What he had was the kind of conviction that cannot be manufactured. The specific, irrational, ultimately productive belief that the answer to the question of the world's fastest car had not yet been given correctly, and that he was the one who was going to give it. That belief, held for 3 decades against every rational argument that it should have been abandoned, is the foundation of everything that happened on that track. The early cars, the CC8S, the CCR, were not just fast, they were statements. The CC8S arrived in 2002 with credentials that the establishment could not simply dismiss. It carried a supercharged Ford V8 producing over 600 horsepower in a carbon fiber body that weighed less than most sports cars of the era had any right to weigh. It was not a refinement of an existing template. There was no existing template. Koenigsegg was building the template in real time, without the safety net of a corporate structure beneath them, and without the luxury of failing quietly. When the CCR broke the McLaren F1's production car speed record in 2005, a record that had stood for 11 years and had been widely treated as a permanent ceiling, it was the first formal announcement that something genuinely different was happening in Ängelholm, and that the automotive establishment was going to have to start paying attention to a name that most of them had struggled to pronounce correctly. And then Bugatti arrived. The Veyron in 2005 did not simply raise the bar.
The Bugatti Veyron from a first-person point of view. What came out in 2005 to become the first ever hypercar.
It rewrote the economic terms of the competition. Here was a car developed with Volkswagen Group resources, with teams of engineers whose employment costs alone exceeded what Koenigsegg would spend on entire vehicle programs. A 16-cylinder, quad-turbocharged engine producing 1,001 horsepower, a top speed verified at 408 kilometers per hour. 700 million euros reportedly spent on development. The message from Wolfsburg was clear, even if it was never stated directly. This is what it costs to build the world's fastest car. This is the price of entry. And some manufacturers can pay it, and some cannot. What followed across the next 2 decades was one of the most compelling and least discussed rivalries in the history of automotive engineering. Koenigsegg answered the Veyron with the Agera. Bugatti answered with the Veyron Supersport, reclaiming the record at 431 kilometers per hour. Koenigsegg answered with the 1-1, a car that introduced the concept of a 1-to-1 power-to-weight ratio in kilograms and produced downforce figures that belonged on a racing prototype. and then Bugatti deployed what was widely understood to be its decisive blow. The Chiron, and then the Chiron Supersport, and then, in 2019, the Chiron Supersport 300 Plus. The first production car verified at over 300 miles per hour, a number so far beyond what anyone had previously achieved that much of the automotive world treated it as a permanent endpoint, except it was not two manufacturers simply building faster cars. It was two completely different answers to the same question. Bugatti's answer was resources, refinement, and the brute accumulation of engineering horsepower applied to a problem until the problem yielded. Koenigsegg's answer was something harder to quantify and ultimately harder to defeat. The willingness to question assumptions that other manufacturers had accepted as constraints, and to develop from scratch the technologies that the rest of the industry simply purchased from suppliers and treated as fixed costs. That difference, philosophical before it is engineering, is what makes every record between these two companies carry a weight that a speed figure alone cannot explain. The hypercar that defied physics, the car that broke the record, is the Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute. And understanding what it did requires understanding what it is, which is not a standard hypercar with an upgraded engine and a revised aerodynamic package. It is a purpose-built exercise in the removal of every constraint that had previously been accepted as permanent. The powertrain begins with a 5-liter twin-turbocharged V8, a configuration that Koenigsegg developed entirely in-house, a point worth pausing on because it separates what happens in Ängelholm from what happens in almost every other hypercar manufacturer's engineering process. The engine produces 1,600 horsepower on E85 biofuel.
Combustion engine car, you can imagine, like a monster, almost normally aspirated engine, but with super responsive turbo.
Making it not only the most powerful production car engine by output, but one of the lightest in its power class, the entire unit weighing less than 200 kilograms. This is not an incremental improvement on a previous generation. The specific attention given to internal friction reduction, to the weight of the reciprocating components, to the thermal management of a unit being asked to sustain power outputs that would destroy conventional architecture. These are the product of engineering decisions made from first principles, not inherited from a supplier's catalog. The transmission, the light-speed transmission, as Koenigsegg named it, represents perhaps the most significant innovation in gearbox technology in a generation. The system contains 9 forward speeds and can theoretically shift between any gear combination instantaneously, without the torque interruption that characterizes every conventional transmission architecture, including the dual-clutch systems used by Bugatti. The engineering principle is straightforward to describe and almost impossibly difficult to execute. Multiple wet clutch packs operating in parallel, allowing gear selection without the sequential engagement that creates shift delays in conventional systems. On paper, it sounds like an incremental refinement. On a track, at the speeds the Jesko Absolute operates, the absence of that torque interruption is the difference between a gear change that loses momentum and a gear change that does not. The aerodynamics of the Jesko Absolute are defined by a single design decision that communicates the car's intent before you look at any other specification. The Jesko exists in 2 configurations: the Jesko Attack, optimized for downforce and track performance, and the Jesko Absolute, optimized for minimum drag and maximum top speed. In the Absolute configuration, Koenigsegg engineers achieved a drag coefficient of 0.278, a figure that, for a car producing this level of power, enables the theoretical top speed that the car subsequently proved was not merely theoretical. That drag figure required a redesign of the rear wing, a fixed unit in the Absolute configuration rather than the active system used by the Attack, and a comprehensive management of airflow through every panel and duct in the bodywork. The result is a car that is not fighting its own aerodynamics at the upper reaches of its performance envelope, but is instead being shaped by air management that was designed specifically around what happens above 350 kilometers per hour. The verified top speed of the Jesko Absolute is 330 miles per hour, 531 kilometers per hour, which positions it as the fastest production car whose theoretical ceiling has been confirmed by engineering analysis. While the full-speed validation run is ongoing, the significance of the engineering achievement is not the final number alone. It is what the number represents about the validity of the engineering philosophy behind it. Koenigsegg did not approach this record by purchasing a faster turbocharger from a supplier or adding a larger wing profile to an existing platform. Every component that contributes to the performance was developed in-house, was questioned from first principles, and was refined through a manufacturing process that the company controls entirely within its facility.
We have some carbon fiber suppliers from other places as well, and we have actually our own carbon fiber manufacturing also in Barcelona.
In Engelholm. This is a record that was not bought. It was engineered. The speed war Bugatti is losing. Bugatti's response arrived through official channels with the composed, measured language of a brand that has spent a century learning how to absorb challenges to its position without appearing to acknowledge them as threats. But language is a precise instrument, and the precision with which Bugatti's leadership has addressed the Koenigsegg record reveals exactly how much is at stake in the framing. The position advanced from Bugatti's side centers on the methodology of record verification. The argument that straight-line speed on a flat, closed track under specific atmospheric and road conditions, using fuel that is not commercially available at a filling station, represents a performance category that is not directly comparable to the comprehensive performance envelope that Bugatti has always maintained as its engineering standard. This is not an entirely unreasonable position. It has coherent engineering logic behind it. And it is also, when examined alongside 2 decades of this rivalry's history, a position that Bugatti has found itself needing to advance with increasing frequency and increasing specificity as the records have moved further from its own capabilities. The pattern is documented across the full length of this rivalry. When the CCR broke the McLaren F1's record in 2005, Bugatti was in the process of preparing the Veyron's own record attempt and was able to absorb the challenge within a competitive response. When the Agera RS set its verified speed record of 447 kilometers per hour in 2017 on a public road in Nevada, a record conducted under conditions that are arguably harder to control, not easier, than a closed test facility. Bugatti tested the validity of the record while simultaneously accelerating the development program that would produce the Chiron Supersport 300 Plus run 2 years later. When Koenigsegg's performance continued to expand, despite the explicit argument that it was operating outside the standards by which true production car performance should be measured, the response shifted from technical contestation to categorical distinction. The argument that these are, effectively, different categories of achievement, and that Bugatti's records and Koenigsegg's records are not measuring the same thing. The reason this particular record is especially difficult for Bugatti to absorb is rooted in what Bugatti has built its identity around for the last 20 years. The Veyron and the Chiron were not marketed as the most focused, the most extreme, or the most uncompromising performance cars available to buyers. They were marketed as the most complete. The cars that achieve ultimate performance while simultaneously delivering the refinement, the safety, the everyday usability, and the manufacturing quality that other ultra-high-performance vehicles could not match. The implicit argument embedded in every Bugatti press release and every CEO interview has been that Koenigsegg's numbers, while impressive in isolation, represent a kind of performance purity that comes at a cost in every other dimension. That you can build a faster car if you are willing to build a less complete one. What makes the Jesko Absolute's record so costly for that narrative is that the Jesko Absolute does not support it. A car that integrates the light-speed transmission, manages its aerodynamics through active and passive systems simultaneously, and is built to standards of fit and finish that place it. It among the most visually refined vehicles at any price point is not a stripped-out speed prototype. It is exactly the kind of car that refuses to accept the trade-off Bugatti has been arguing is inevitable. A CEO's measured public response to a competitor's record is always the controlled surface of a deeper institutional discomfort. And the specificity of Bugatti's arguments about this record, the precision of the objections being raised, tells you that the discomfort is substantial. The real reason Koenigsegg keeps winning. For most of automotive history, the idea would have sounded absurd. One manufacturer backed by the full weight of the Volkswagen Group, billions in development capital.
Germany's Volkswagen says it will work together with U.S. auto startup,
Thousands of engineers, and testing infrastructure that most governments could not afford. The other, a Swedish company operating out of a repurposed military hangar in a town most people cannot find on a map, building fewer cars in a single year than Bugatti delivers in a matter of weeks. And yet, time after time, across 2 decades of the most watched rivalry in the hypercar world, Koenigsegg keeps arriving at the frontier first. The question that the automotive world has never fully answered is why. The answer begins with a distinction that sounds simple and turns out to be everything. Bugatti and Koenigsegg are not competing versions of the same approach. They are 2 completely different answers to the question of where automotive progress actually comes from. Bugatti's answer is refinement, the belief that the greatest car is produced by assembling the greatest available components, integrating them with the greatest available engineering expertise, and optimizing the result to a standard of completeness that no competitor can match. It is a legitimate philosophy. The Chiron's 8-liter, quad-turbocharged 16-cylinder engine, producing 1,500 horsepower while simultaneously meeting emission standards, delivering thermal reliability across operating conditions, and functioning as the centerpiece of a car that its owners can drive rather than merely display, represents engineering achievement of the highest order. When Bugatti verified the Chiron Supersport 300 Plus at 304.77 miles per hour in 2019, it was a moment that the automotive world treated as a permanent boundary, a line drawn at the outer edge of what refinement could produce. But while Bugatti was perfecting the formula, Koenigsegg was asking a different question entirely. Not how do you optimize what already exists, but what if what already exists is the wrong starting point? Christian von Koenigsegg built his company around first principles, thinking at a level that no mainstream manufacturer had attempted since the earliest days of the industry. The philosophy is straightforward in description and almost impossible in execution. Every system in every car must be questioned from its foundations, and if the existing solution cannot be improved sufficiently, it must be replaced, not refined. Replaced with something built from scratch. The most dramatic demonstration of that philosophy is the free-valve engine developed for the Gemera, a 2-liter, 3-cylinder unit producing 600 horsepower, operating without a conventional camshaft. Every valve controlled independently and electronically, removing the mechanical coupling between valve timing and engine speed that has governed internal combustion design for more than a century. This is not a better version of an existing engine architecture. It is a different architecture entirely. One that removes a constraint so fundamental that most engineers had stopped treating it as a constraint at all. The same thinking produced the light-speed transmission, a 9-speed gearbox capable of shifting between any gear combination instantaneously without torque interruption, because multiple wet clutch packs operate in parallel rather than in sequence. The same thinking produced the in-house carbon fiber monocoque, the proprietary aerodynamic systems, and the weight targets that other manufacturers treat as physically impossible. Each record Koenigsegg has set carries the same underlying message. The Agera RS in 2017
is one of the rarest supercars in the world.
The Jesko Absolute's engineering validation that followed. None of these achievements were produced by spending more than the competition. They were produced by questioning what the competition had already accepted as settled. Bugatti asks how to build the best version of what already exists. Koenigsegg asks what exists that should not, and builds the replacement. That difference, sustained it across 30 years and every car the company has ever produced, is the reason the records keep changing. and it is the reason they will keep changing. The real lesson of the record: step back from the numbers, the cars, and the executive responses, and what you are actually looking at is something far larger than one rivalry. You are watching the automotive world's oldest assumption about performance being tested in real time. The assumption that the manufacturer with the most resources will always produce the greatest car. That assumption is not holding up. For 30 years, the received wisdom was simple: extreme performance requires extreme funding. Volkswagen Group's investment in Bugatti was the most explicit statement of that principle in automotive history. 700 million euros for the Veyron's development sent a message that was impossible to misread: that the price of entry at the absolute top of automotive performance was a number that eliminated most of the competition before the first wheel turned. And for a period, the argument looked correct. The Veyron was comprehensively beyond what any other manufacturer had achieved. The breadth of it, not just top speed but power management, thermal stability, and real-world usability at extreme performance levels, appeared to justify everything the investment had cost. What the subsequent 20 years have revealed is that resource advantage is a diminishing asset at the frontier of performance. Not because money stops being useful, it remains useful. But the frontier has moved into territory where the constraints are no longer primarily financial. They are conceptual. Assumptions embedded in existing engineering about how valves are timed, how gears are changed, how light a structural component can become before the manufacturing process required to achieve that weight exceeds the capability of the team attempting it. Budget does not remove those constraints. The willingness to question them does. And the organizational culture that makes questioning them possible is not something that can be purchased from a supplier. For collectors and buyers, this shift is permanent. A decade ago, choosing a Koenigsegg over a Bugatti meant prioritizing the engineering purity of a performance number over the completeness of the ownership experience and the historical authority of the brand. That trade-off no longer exists in the same form. Koenigsegg's performance is not less comprehensive than Bugatti's. It is differently comprehensive, and in the dimensions that define the absolute ceiling of what a production car can do, it is more comprehensive. The buyer who wants to own the car that has genuinely performed at the highest level of any production car on Earth has had a clear answer to that question for several years now. And that answer is not Molsheim. It is Engelholm. The implications extend beyond these two manufacturers. Pagani, Rimac, and the emerging wave of focused performance companies have watched what Koenigsegg built and understood the lesson. The era in which institutional scale guaranteed a position at the top of the hypercar hierarchy is ending. Christian von Koenigsegg has spent more than half of his life proving a single proposition: that the limit has not been reached, and that the people most likely to find it are the ones who never accepted that it existed. That proof of concept is more durable than any record, because it changes what the next generation of engineers believes they are permitted to attempt. The establishment set the number. I called it the ceiling. Spent 700 million euros defending it. And somewhere in Engelholm, a team of fewer than 300 people quietly built something that made that ceiling irrelevant. That is the Koenigsegg story, and it is far from finished. If this video gave you something to think about, hit like and let us know in the comments. Bugatti, Koenigsegg, or someone else entirely, who builds the world's greatest hypercar right now? Subscribe to the channel, because what Koenigsegg is engineering next makes this record look like a warm-up lap. You do not want to miss that one.